See, I believe in hope. I believe in believe. Honey, is that an ingredient or is that something you're just calling me right now? Ingredient. Shoot, I was kind of hoping it was the other one.
How worried are you about the threat of relegation?
Well, Lloyd, right now I'm mostly concerned with the definition of relegation. Congrats. You both just met a cool person.
On three. 1, 2, 3.
Come on, Richmond!
Yo. Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural episode of Talking Lasso, where I am your host, Josh Scar from Talking Smack, as you are well aware, because this is a Talking Smack feed. But it's not one of my regular smackheads with me. It is the beautiful, wonderful, very British Joey Fitzgerald. Joey, how are we doing?
I'm really good. I really appreciated starting with Yo. I don't know if that was a reference to the episode that we watched.
It was definitely a reference.
I like it. I think you should continue doing it.
I didn't want to do welcome back to another episode because it's not another episode. It's a brand new episode. But yes, the yo will be the intro to all these now. It's canon.
I also don't know if I was going to say take umbrage, but that would really put a spin on what I was saying. I don't know if I take umbrage with the very British Joey Fitzgerald. I don't know if I'm very British, but then I do use words like umbrage. So make of that what you will. How are you doing, Josh?
I believe you referred to your brother once as effervescent.
Everpheasant is what I actually said by accident, but I did mean effervescent. I call him
effervescent.
There's an episode that we recorded, I can't remember if it's out yet, where I describe him as rambunctious, which I really enjoy as well. No idea what it actually means, but I go for these things because it throws Slade off. I should explain, sorry, who Slade and Tim are. You can find me at my other podcast at Game Club Pod, if you are so inclined, where I am joined by Timothy, my brother, and Slade. I don't know what Slade is, just an enigma. You'll have heard him on here before. But you can find us there. It's like a book club for games. But Josh and I have been very excited for Ted Lasso Series 3. Very excited indeed. We did an episode on here. You might have heard it. And this all came about because I messaged Josh yesterday, which was the 15th of March, and saying, Happy Lasso Day. I'm very excited. And Josh said, you want to do a podcast about it? I was like, fucking right, I do. So here we are, the day later. I've watched the episode twice. I've got notes, which is normally a bad thing for us, but it's okay this time. It's a good thing. Trust me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this came together really quickly, and I could not be happier because I've wanted to talk about Ted Lasso, but finding someone to regularly get to talk about it on the podcast is a little bit of a chore. Not that like Matt doesn't watch it, but creating times to do this. And this is a kind of show where I think you want to go week to week. It's not one where you're going to come back to it at the end, especially with it being the last season, supposedly, where it's going to just all culminate and you got to come back and talk about the entire series. I think doing it week to week for this final season, allegedly, will suit the show better, as well as us getting to hang out and talk Ted Lasso and other things.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, I've already promised Josh that there won't be any football finance chat in this unless there is a specific question. So apologies for that in the last Ted Lasso episode. I listened back to it and I thought, oh God, even I wouldn't listen to him, and I was saying it. So I promise it won't happen again.
So let's preface that there will be some football talk, some sports talk, because as someone who does not follow football of the European fashion, I don't know anything about how the structure of the leagues work. So there will be points where I'll ask these questions, and Joey, being a massive football fan, or football mad, as they say over across the pond, he will give us insights and give me insights, and therefore you as well.
Does it pain you to say football? Is it weird to say football?
A little weird, but it doesn't pain me. Like I'm not like American football is the only football. I don't care. They could call it whatever they want. I'm fine with hand egg ball if they want to.
So let's talk about Ted Lasso. I can't remember the exact point that we left off season 2. I really should have watched that episode before we started recording. But Richmond just got promoted to the Premier League, and they were celebrating, which is Good. Well done, Richmond. In our intro, you would have heard Ted say the thing he's struggling with is the definition of relegation. Josh, really quickly, do you understand the idea of relegation and promotion within football leagues?
So yeah, I believe I do, thanks to Ted Lasso. So basically the bottom two teams in the league get demoted into the league below them.
Yes, that's right.
And there are 5 tiers of league.
Well, there's more than that, but professional tiers. And sorry, it's 3 teams in the Premier League. It differs league to league, but if you finish in the bottom 3 teams, in the Premier League table at the end of the season, you're demoted to the division below.
So therefore, the championship, the top 3 teams would come up.
Well, it gets a bit more complicated than that. I'm not going to go fully into it. The top 2 teams go up automatically, and then places 3 to 6. 3. I had to count that out. Yeah, places 3, 4, 5, and 6 go into a playoff situation.
Okay.
So you could finish 6th and still get promoted.
Okay, that's kind of cool. I like that, and I think more American leagues would benefit from that instead of dealing with tanking all the dang time. Tanking in sports is just American sports is such a problem.
I think, but there are benefits to it because you have the only thing, and I'll admit now that I am a very plastic American football fan in the fact that I care about it for about a week around the Super Bowl, and that's it. But you have lots of different teams winning it, whereas in England you have the same. There's 6 teams that finish in the top 6 nearly every year, so much so that pundits call them the Big Six. And it irks quite a lot of fans, but the reality of it is those 6 teams are the ones that are competing for top spot. And I think by, as you say, tanking the league, by not having relegation, you open it up to a much more varied ending at the top of the league. Whereas in England, the league, the real exciting bit, in my opinion, is the very bottom. Because you wait for the last day to see who the third or maybe the second team that are going to get relegated are. That's where the enjoyment is. Enjoyment in others' misery is a very British thing.
That's fair, I guess. So trying to think about the end of season 2 with Ted Lasso, we had the indecision of what's going on with Roy and Keeley.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we found out that Rupert bought West Ham and has also stolen Nate from the team.
Yes, that was the big reveal at the end.
So Nate has kind of gone full Darth Vader, which we'll get into that a little bit here. And then Ted has kind of come to grips with his anxiety and his panic attacks. Obviously, it's not a curable thing, but he has accepted them as part of who he is.
Yeah.
So this episode picks up with a 6-week off season just recently coming to an end. I believe it's 6 weeks.
It's somewhere around that, but yeah.
Yeah, so Ted's dropping off Henry, his son, at the airport. They just spent 6 weeks together. Now he's got to go back to the States, and Ted's dealing with the realization that maybe going to London or England to coach in the Premiership and coach European football has not necessarily proved to be the cure-all that he was hoping it would be after giving his now ex-wife space.
Yeah, I always think, I've put in my notes here that it starts at Heathrow Airport, and whenever anything starts at Heathrow Airport, it makes me think of Love Actually. This one did not start like Love Actually, but it was, I don't know, there was you shared a thread with me before this around like callbacks to series 1 and 2.
Yes.
And there was something about the look on his face when he's on the plane versus when he's sending Henry on the plane. I never thought about it like that, but he looks awful in that first shot. You can tell that he's really, really sad about Henry going. So
yeah, he's clearly depressed.
Yeah, although I did think there was a line in this where they were calling him over the intercom and saying Henry Lasso, and then he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, we were trying to unlock Princess Peach on Super Smash Brothers." And then the flight attendant says, "Don't worry, I once held a whole flight hostage while I tried to finish the final level of Breath of the Wild," which I just
Yep. That was written by people who do not play modern video games, but
Nor
know the
fly,
references.
I imagine. Nor fly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a really strange line. But you get the shot of the air hostess helping Henry to the plane and waving Ted away. There are points, and I might mention this a little bit throughout the episode. I thought some of the acting was very wooden in parts of this episode. And I don't think it was terrible, but I don't think Henry's a particularly believable child actor.
No.
I don't know what you think of that. I found him, because he appears here and he appears at the end as well. And I just thought, no, probably none of the lines that he delivered were believable.
That's the risk you run with having child actors, is sometimes they're not great. Like Phoebe's fantastic. I thought Phoebe in everything, she's just been awesome. Whereas Henry, not so much, but I think that he serves his purpose well enough. But yeah, he is not a great child actor, if anything. But I'm not gonna go full scorched earth on the kid. He's a kid just making some money for his family at this point.
Probably quite a lot of it as well.
One thing I will say with Henry and Phoebe is you can tell they wait for COVID restrictions to lift to get these kids back on set, because they look so much older.
Yeah, especially Phoebe, who we see quite a lot of in the previous season.
Yeah, she looks very pre-teenish now, even though she was in first grade last time we saw her.
Yeah, and we'll get to her, but the scene where she's in it and she's eating ice cream, they're definitely trying to like lower her age a little bit with her action, but it doesn't. Yeah, like you said, she's very preteen now. In the space of 6 weeks, which is just incredible.
Yes.
But then, so we leave Henry and we leave Henry at the gate, and Ted has a call with the doctor. I can't remember her name. He only ever calls her Doc in this, and I think in previous ones. But
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I think her name is Sharon, but I can't remember her first name or her last name.
Well, let's just call her the Doc. I think I was really pleased to see her back. Actually, I think she's really good, and I think she brings a lot of really good stuff out in Ted. I really like that the conversation wasn't a therapy conversation like it first came off, because they said, we got a bit of time where I can talk. And Ted says, well, can I ask you the personal questions? So they do this all the time. And he says, are you seeing anyone? And she says, I'm not answering that. And he replies, well, normally you say no, so that means yes. And that kind of friendly conversation just implies she seems quite cold normally. And I think that's just part of her character. But I feel like there's a bit of warmth between her and Ted, which I really liked.
They've grown to understand each other really well too, which I feel like that, as you mentioned, it really plays off really well that Ted is so observant with people, especially her, that he's like, oh, okay. So usually you say no, but now you're saying no comment. So clearly you're seeing someone, which I will say, I thought they were going to go with Doc being either bi or gay. I don't know. She just comes off that way, but she's got a man in her bed. So, I mean, maybe the bi thing is still in the play, but the way she comes off, I would have pegged them to go with a representative kind of play with the character.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever thought about it like that, but I understand what you mean. She definitely has a man in her bed, because when she's off the phone, he says, oh, you've gotten off? And then she goes, not yet. And it was like, woo, and you could have had do-do-do-do-do. But then it cuts away, and Ted's walking to the training ground, which there was a line in this that I don't know how much it meant to you, but I thought was really funny. He walks past a child being pushed in a pram, and he goes, I've written it down, he goes, oh, you look like the leaky diapers, which is obviously like the Peaky Blinders. And it's very, very good line. I don't know if you've seen Peaky Blinders.
I've not. I've heard of it, but I've not seen it. But good little reference.
But they all wear flat caps, and it's based just after the First World War. So because this child is wearing a flat cap, he calls him the leaky diapers, which was very good. Really enjoyed that. And then we cut to the conversation between Leslie and Rebecca. Now, this is the conversation I thought was super wooden. This is the one I took the most problem with, where they're talking about all of the pundits are thinking we're going to finish last, dead last, and Rupert's going to do really well and finish fourth. In the top four, sorry. So the top four is important because that's what gets you into like the European places, the creme de la creme of the Champions League. And you play the top teams in the rest of Europe, and that's where real money. I know I wasn't going to talk finance, but that's where the real money is. But it is a real thing here at the start of the season where teams get absolutely panned for where they're predicted to finish before a ball is even kicked. So this kind of sets up the premise of the whole episode of everyone thinks we're going to be terrible. How do we stop the team thinking they're going to be terrible? Because there doesn't seem like a lot of belief from Leslie or Rebecca in this scene. And they actually used this as the preview for the episode. They released this scene before they released the episode, and I was really surprised because I didn't think it was particularly well done.
Yeah, I caught the preview, but what stuck out to me was the whole he-them conversation where Ted's focused on West Ham as a team and an organization, where Rebecca's back to kind of season one Rebecca, which they hammer home pretty hard that she's solely focused on making Rupert's life miserable by being better than he expects her to be.
I'm going to come on to the West Ham things. There's a couple of things that I think is really bizarre. One, that West Ham would agree to be this kind of villainous entity because they're a real football club.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, they're a very big football club. They're struggling at the moment, but they are a very big football club who play in Europe over the last few seasons semi-regularly. But whenever they're represented in film or TV, they're always like bad guys. And I don't know why they agreed to it, because they filmed in West Ham Stadium in this episode. So, it's a strange one. But we go from this conversation where they're saying, we're going to finish last, and it cuts to the team going, even so-and-so said we're going to finish last, and they're losing all faith. And this is where my favourite line in the whole episode comes from, and it's when they're talking tactics with Roy, who Brett Goldstein, once again, fantastic in everything he's in, plays this Roy Kent to perfection. They're talking, and Ted makes a reference to playing FIFA with Henry all summer, and that's where he learned who Maradona was. And he also learned that he also had to teach Henry that cocaine is bad. Now, Maradona was a footballer in, I want to say, the 80s. It was either the 70s or the 80s, and he was widely regarded as the best in the world. As soon as before he finished playing football, he very publicly had a raging addiction to cocaine and had no intention to stop or do better or better himself, to the point where there are videos of him at the World Cup covered in cocaine in the stadium cheering on Argentina.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's if ever you get a chance, I might do, because we're going to do a section later on where I tell you some mad football stories. If we've got a slightly longer section, I might do a whole one on Maradona and his cocaine abuse, because there are some wild stories that include bringing grenades to the training ground and things like that.
Oh my God.
He was an excellent footballer, but a very problematic character.
That's putting it nicely.
But what did you think of the void left by Nate within the tactics room?
I like that they showcased it really well, because it shows that they have no malice towards Nate. Like they do not fully understand why Nate has left. Mm-hmm. And even Roy is like, I'm not the tactician that Nate was. I don't have that scheming ability. I was literally just a player who you told me where to go and I knew what to do. And I'm really curious to see how this 4-4-2 plan works out, because it feels like it's going to be either something that just works because it is so simple, or they're going to have to find a way to get Ted more involved in the scheming to make sure that they aren't getting just destroyed, because I do feel like it could be another come from behind kind of thing where they start off really poorly and then Ted just kind of starts picking up his end of the bargain instead of just being the guy that's the lightning rod for the media and kind of a morale booster. He's actually going to start understanding football more, and he's going to do stuff that Nate would never dream of, because as we establish in this episode, Nate, while creative on the pitch, is not that creative of a person.
He's an asshole. I think is the nice way of putting it. But yeah, I think the 442
we'll get into that
is...
because it's kind of like the Joel question of, is he a good person or a bad person from The Last of Us? Like, is Nate really an asshole, or we'll get into it.
Did you think when I hit record today that you'd be comparing Ted Lasso and The Last of Us, or is this your way of getting in on the Last of Us chat on the episode that you missed on Talking Smack?
A little bit of both. I fully expected to talk about The Last of Us. Not really. No. No, that literally just came to me. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about The Last of Us in a later episode, but with this one, it felt like a good comparison, because you and I privately had talked about, is Joel a good person or a bad person? And I think I'll get into it now, just jumping ahead a little bit. So when we first see Nate, yeah, he's that asshole that we feel like we saw at the end of season 2. Like, he's got the shit-eating grin on his face. Rupert's like touching him, manipulating him. But when we see him behind closed doors, we still see a little bit of that insecure Nate. And I think that's really interesting, because I expected him to just go full-blown villain guy, like Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader. Like, he's just like, okay, I'm the bad guy now. I need to prove myself. I have a chip on my shoulder, and I'm going to do anything to prove that I am worthy of this. But we see a little bit of that stumbling where he's like a little sheepish and not quite self-assured. But then he does have those moments where he does like the Rebecca thing, where he makes himself big, but in his case, he spits on himself or whatever. And we see little bits of him pushing the good Nathan down, kind of, again, Anakin to Darth Vader.
I guess he spends the whole time projecting what he wants the world to see him like, right? And I think he spent so much time in the first series being the bottom of the pile that he does not want to fall back down to that. He does not want to go back down to that position. I think what's really interesting is it seems like we never see before Ted gets to Richmond. Season 1 opens with him being hired, essentially. But it's very clear that the attitude towards people who aren't in the first team squad or the coaching staff changes massively with Ted. He brings respect to every level of that team and makes them feel part of the team. And I wonder if they're really going to amp up this Nate being an asshole, for lack of a better term, because he thinks that everywhere is like pre-Ted Richmond, which could well be the case in football stadiums, but I wonder if that's how he sees himself, as having to assert his dominance. I do think that it's going to go one of two ways, where he goes, oh, I'm so sorry for being horrible, and ends up back at Richmond, or he's just going to disappear at the end of it, or towards the end of it, because it's not going to go well. I don't think it's the way it's written so far, it doesn't look like it's going to go well for Nate.
I think it's going to be a little bit Mighty Ducks, where they're going to do really well because he has all these great schemes, but because he doesn't have the team's heart like Ted does,
yeah,
they're going to fall at the end. Like, something's going to happen where they end up in like 5th place. Like, I don't think they're going to make them just fall out of the league. I think they're going to make them just miss something important, even if it's like maybe just winning the cup.
Yeah, maybe.
But
maybe.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where I think it's either going to go one of two ways, where Nate's embarrassed to the point where he has no job, but Ted's going to bring him to America with him or something, or he's going to send him to America to coach in the MLS, or if things end amicably, he's going to turn on Rupert, kind of similar to Rebecca. He's going to wise up to Rupert's manipulations and all that. And I think Ted's going to retire and go back to the United States, and Nate is going to take over Richmond.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's very possible. I think that the fact that they took so much time in Nate's, and we are jumping ahead a little bit to Nate's press conference where he's introduced as manager, and they spent the first half of that scene really showing him as terrified, and because they could have easily have just done asshole Nate from minute one and have him do the spitting on his own face thing before he went into that press conference. Because thinking about it, if you were going to go and face the press and you wanted to portray yourself as that, you would have done that before you were even announced, right? You would have walked out there having already done your ritual.
I think that was one part that really threw me off for the episode, was because he would have had an introductory press conference. This wouldn't be his first press conference, I wouldn't think.
But I don't know.
Usually when you hire a new manager, wouldn't you?
Well, not if it's in the middle of the mid-season break. No. Sorry, not the mid-season break, the end of season break. They wouldn't. They would use the first conference of the season to introduce the manager as well.
That's very much unlike American sports, where they will introduce the new manager like the day after they are hired.
Yeah. Well, but okay. So we've jumped ahead a little bit, but we'll come back to that. Keely's office is the next bit after we kind of meet Nate. Sorry, the only thing I should say about Nate that's an important plot point in this is Nate shows up in his very old Mini Cooper, his classic Mini Cooper, and there's a scene where we're in Rupert's office, which, or maybe that's in the next one. No, that's in the next time we're at West Ham. Let's go to Keely's office, where we see Keely has this PR business that's doing really well. And it has one of my favourite lines in the show, "Fuck you, Joe Rogan."
Yes. That was perfect episode just from that line.
Well, they have another one in an earlier one in that thread that you showed me where she says, "Fuck you, Piers Morgan," which is equally as satisfying, really. But I think this whole thing was to show vulnerability of Keely, because Keely's kind of gone through this real character arc from season one, where she's gone from just being the girlfriend of Jamie Tarr to being in charge and really taken under Rebecca's wing, essentially, and being like this woman who is starting an empire. And then the second that the doors are closed, or those privacy shades that she has on a button on the window, which were really cool, by the way.
Yes, those windows are so cool.
When people can't see her, the first thing she does is burst into tears. And kind of lets herself be vulnerable with Rebecca, which I thought was really, really nice and sweet, and very much a continuation of last series. It's exactly what I would expect from Keely's character.
Yeah, and I do think it shows, even though we don't have the answer to it yet, we kind of see that she doesn't necessarily have Roy, even though we don't have a full answer as to what happened with them yet. We see that she doesn't have Roy to quite lean on the way she was used to. And so the pressure of not having Roy as her rock, as just like that steady presence in her life, and just having these irregular meetings with Rebecca, just they don't allow her to decompress the way she's used to, especially on top of all the new responsibilities she has. And that CFO she has is just so lovely.
Yeah, that CFO is a robot. She comes in and she's like, "What are we doing spending £200 a month on flowers?" And Keely says, "Well, they look and smell nice." And then the CFO is like, "Yeah, we stop that right now. They don't serve any purpose unless," what does she say? "You're dead or something
You're
else."
dead or divorce or something like that.
Something like that. And then she leaves.
Yeah, they're for funerals and divorces or something to that effect. And
yeah.
I feel like do you think she canceled those flower orders, or do you think Keely is enough of a boss to be like, no, we're still getting these flowers?
No, I feel like because she said that her investors put the CFO in place, but she's still in charge, I think the CFO would have cancelled those flowers.
I feel like £200 a month is not that much for decor. I don't know. I used to work for a company that when customers got upset, we would give them $50, $100, which to me, I'm like, they don't deserve that. And the company's like, that's pennies to us. Don't worry about it.
Right. But I think because this wasn't in place, this PR company wasn't in place when we left off season 2. This is brand new and has grown massively. She's obviously had some investment, and I think it's one of those where you have to justify every penny spent, and that's exactly what the CFO is doing. I think what we'll see throughout the season, we might see more of the CFO or mentions of the CFO stopping the enjoyment and stifling who Keely really is.
I can see that. That could be a good conflict for Keely.
Well, especially with, I think that gives her exactly what you just said. She needs someone to rely on, and as she's now so separate from the club of Richmond, I think it gives her a way of being more involved with the show and needing to rely on Rebecca for that stifling, like, reassurance and support.
Which then leads to more meet cutes with Roy and the inevitable return of their relationship. I was kind of surprised to find that out, which again, I'm jumping ahead, which Keely says at the end of the scene that she and Roy have to have the talk with Phoebe, which going back to season 2, I was really hoping that they weren't going to be playing the like Ross and Rachel card of are they going to get back together or whatever, where they just were like, Keely was so set on like, no, we'll be fine. You're going to go on this vacation. I'm going to start this company. We'll come back together once you're back and everything will be fine. And that apparently just didn't work for Roy. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's, you're right though. It's inevitable that they'll end up back together. I hope. I genuinely hope. It's one of those, sometimes you really don't care about an on-screen couple, but I think Keely and Roy are a very good one.
They're a very good balance of bubbly and serious.
Bubbly and Roy.
Yes.
And then, so we cut from Keely's office to the training pitch. And my note on the training pitch is, this is the closest we get to football in this episode. There's no football in this episode, which I think for the first episode of the season was quite surprising to me, really. We don't even get a lot of the training pitch, to be honest. We get them whinging more about being picked last. They say something about Paddington Bear saying that they're going to finish last. And Roy, go on, sorry, what were you going to say?
I love that moment because I love the idea that Danny Rojas is so innocent that he thinks Paddington Bear is real and has his own Twitter account.
Yeah, well, there's a line that Jamie Tart says, and he says, on a scale of 1 to 5 marmalade sandwiches, we have no marmalade sandwiches, which I just thought was really funny, really so out of touch of what an actual footballer would say. But I think it just shows a softening of Jamie over the seasons that we've gotten to know.
There's a line that Jamie has later that's taken the internet by storm that I want to. It's a weird line to dissect, but I want to talk about it.
Okay, cool. So we move from there, and we have kind of a cut together of 2 scenes. And one is Nate's press conference, which we've already spoken a little bit about. And then another is Ted and Coach Beard taking the team on like a field trip to a sewer.
And that was, I loved that switching back and forth. That was so cool.
Yeah, it was good. I did think that the sewer, when I first watched it the first time, I thought they maybe didn't need to do the sewer. But then actually, when you think about it and watch it knowing what's going to happen, the sewer makes sense for the story. I don't know if it makes sense if you thought about this as like a real thing, but I think you have to...
The suspension of disbelief.
Thank you. Yeah, you have to suspend your belief and think, like, there's a line where there's photos of them climbing into the sewer. And in the press conference, they say, have you seen... Nate's press conference, they say, have you seen what your ex-team are doing? And they show him the picture of them climbing in the sewer. And he says, well, that's because Ted Lasso's a shitty coach. Which they act like is the funniest quip you've ever heard. But it's really not. And Matt made a really, really good point in your Discord, Josh, of the people in the Ted Lasso universe are exceptionally bad at memes.
It's true.
Nate's phone, he's just scrolling through Twitter, and they're just the most unfunny memes that you've ever heard. They're like, I am the true wunderkind, as if you're going to look at that and go, what a jape. I am very impressed with that one.
He got me there.
Yeah, but the whole idea in the sewer is that before the sewer, the shit just used to run the streets. With the sewer, you can flush all the bad things away. And he's kind of using it as an analogy for people saying that they're going to be shit this season. You just need to flush it away. They stayed in the sewer a long time in this episode. I didn't quite realize how long it was. And I'm not sure it was worth the
Maybe
reveal.
It's foreshadowing.
Maybe.
Like I said, maybe they're going to start poorly and then something's going to happen and the the sewage is gonna start getting processed, and they're gonna rise and hit the ocean. I don't know.
Or maybe they'll just be shit all season, and it'll just be a really depressing one of Ted Lasso.
There you go.
That's the British in me. That's the pessimist British in me coming out.
But speaking of the sewer scene, so the part that's taking the internet by storm is Jamie's line where talking about how they're in a sewer surrounded by, and I'm going to do the accent as best I can, okay, and I apologize in advance, but they're surrounded by pupae.
It's like he's meant to be from Manchester, and I know quite a lot of people from Manchester, and I don't think any of them would say poopy. It's I've written down in the next scene because he says the word poopy again. I hate how Jamie
sorry, he
says
what?
Poopy. Poopy.
But this is actually the line I wanted to talk about because he says pupae, and I feel like if this was season 1 Jamie, who's like just so egotistical and self-absorbed, he would have been like, he either would not have been there, or he would have been like, it's a river of shite, or however they would say it.
That sounded a little bit Irish.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I apologize. But he would have said shit or shite, whatever. And in this one, he says pupae because he's lightened up a little bit. He's not as self-absorbed. He's bought into the familyness of it. And I feel like it's a stupid line that I'm sure, I can't remember the actor's name. He said it just to make everyone laugh. Yeah. But it comes across to me, at least, of like showing a little bit of growth for Jamie, where he is not quite as vulgar and self-absorbed because he's being silly, saying weird words.
I wrote down in the next line, because he says it again in the dressing room after this. I just wrote, I hate how Jamie says poopy.
But it is important that he's the one that kind of recognizes the sewage moment where he's like, hey, we just need to let it go. We need to let it just flow through.
Well, that's quite a nice segue into the next scene in the dressing room, where they're back to panicking very quickly. And Jamie says, think about the poopy. And it's like, they do that. And then they all go, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. We'll be fine. The thing I really liked about this is when they started panicking, Ted was like, okay, I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to have to go and do it myself again. And the person that stopped him going out was Roy. And Roy showing faith in Jamie, I just wrote, Roy has faith in Jamie, and I drew a little heart. It was a lovely moment. And I think Jamie's growing up and Roy is warming up, which is it's great. Ted Lasso's so good at character development, isn't it?
It really is.
We then move on. Basically, Rebecca is fuming about them going to a sewer. Honestly, if I was the owner of the football club, I think I would be fuming as well. It makes you a bit of a laughing stock. So she calls Ted into her office, and I think this is the first time in all 3 series where she's genuinely angry with Ted, right?
Yeah, for doing something unexpected and not in what she thinks is the best interest of the team. Because obviously she gets mad in season 1 when he's succeeding in helping them grow because he's ruining her plans. But in this one, she is genuinely mad because he's doing something that in a lot of respects is kind of reckless. I don't think they take it into account, but like, you can also get really sick being down there. Like, that's gross. They're talking about how, people used to get cholera all the time. Like, what else are we exposing ourselves to down here?
Well, yeah. And I think if you actually think about it, this is the kind of act that she literally brought Ted in to do, to make the club a laughing stock and to punish Rupert for cheating and leaving her with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's almost come up with this plan, and it's just bitten her in the ass 2 seasons later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
but will it?
But will it? And we have to go to a press conference then with Ted, the initial season press conference that every club does. And I really like, there's a recurring journalist that's there, and he's sat right at the front of this one, and his name is Lloyd Griffith in real life. He's a comedian, and he's very funny, and he's managed to get this job on Ted Lasso. You'll have heard his voice in our in the intro to this episode. Lloyd Griffith's face in this is, he just I've never seen a man look so bemused by human words before. It looks like they went, the camera will be 4 miles away, but we still want to see all of your expressions, because his face just looks like he's expanding every element of it. If you watch it again, go back and watch. He's front and center of the press conference.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Ted's come out naked to deliver the press conference. It's really funny.
I'll have to look for those little nuances.
Yeah, but Rebecca basically makes this point of, you have to go out there and fight to be better than West Ham. We need to beat Rupert. Once again, making this about Rupert rather than the club.
The success of the club, yeah.
And Ted, being Ted, doesn't do this. He goes out, he wishes Nate the absolute best. He still calls him Nate Dog. He says he's a real junkyard dog, which I enjoyed quite a lot.
Still refers to him as Nate the Great as well.
Yeah, Nate the Great. And it was just nice to see that they didn't cave. And because he could have gone, what an asshole, because he's being an asshole. But then he goes, if he really wanted to stick the boot in on me, he could have said. And then he just turns it around and it stops being about how great West Ham are. And it goes back to being how lovable Ted is. And it was the most Ted Lasso way of turning things self-deprecatingly in his favour. I don't know if it would have gone over that well with club supporters, though.
Well, they all still hate him anyway, despite getting promoted and everything. They still think he's a joke, but it's one of those things where it does feel like they've settled into a groove. But one thing that has still kind of been lingering through all this as well, which I think maybe part of that self-deprecating humor that Ted is bringing on is a little bit of a coping mechanism as well, because throughout the episode, we see he's dealing with a little bit of depression and separation anxiety, that like he's no longer around his son. Maybe him leaving is what caused his divorce. He's second guessing a lot of stuff now.
Yeah.
And so like you said, it's a very Ted thing for him to do, to turn it around and just start making fun of himself. But I'm wondering if maybe we're not going to see that come back as like a coping mechanism. Like it's going to become a semi-regular thing where West Ham creates some jabs at Richmond's expense, and Ted's just going to kind of keep being a lightning rod because he thinks he deserves to be punished for leaving his family and potentially causing his own divorce.
Yeah, I'd never actually thought of the wider implication, but Ted Lasso is full of bringing it back to the wider implications, isn't it?
It's a weird show that can do that. It can be wide, it can be narrow. And it's like last season, I did not expect it to go as wide as it did. I was like, okay, we're going to get back to the football and just like the jovialness of it, right? No, we're going to be depressed the whole season with some jokes in between. Okay.
Well, they brought back, because the thing that was really depressing in that was Ted's way of dealing with his father's suicide, right? That was the real low point of Ted in season 2. And they spoke about his dad in this episode again very early on, being not there when he finished school. So the janitor he helped the janitor clean up, and then his dad gave the janitor some money for looking after his son, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, oh, we're going to start here, are we? But it just didn't do that this time. I think it's focusing on a very different flaw that Ted sees in himself rather than one that he's trying to suppress.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good. And then so you cut from the press conference to Nate, who's pissed off that his very clever jab at Ted Lasso being a shitty coach didn't work. It didn't annoy him. And then we cut back to more memes of Nate, and there's one that I really liked, and I wrote it down, and it's Nate looking really a bit gormless, and it just says, "Who's the wanker now?" It's so not funny, but it's great. But then we get the cut of the club secretary coming in saying, "Rupert's bought you a present. It's a car," and he goes out and it's this amazing supercar. But it's the exact same car that was in the callback that you said sent me again in season 1. And he says when Ted and Nate walk out, and he goes, "Is this your car?" And he goes, "Oh, I couldn't handle a car like that." And now that's the car he drives. Mm-hmm. It was very cool, very clever.
Yeah, very good character development sort of thing with subtext and visuals instead of just openly being like, "Ooh, maniacal."
Yeah. I did think that every time we went to West Ham, It looked a bit like an 80s villain's lair.
I was thinking the Death Star with the Emperor in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, good one. I wrote Rupert's office looks like a Batman villain's lair.
Yes.
Which they're not subtle about Rupert being a bad guy, are they?
He's wearing all black. His office is all black. He's got very sharp angles on everything. Even his window, that is a giant circle, still has sharp angles inside of it.
Yeah, it's good. And then we move to the heartbreaking scene of Keely and Roy. Walk us through this one, Josh, because this one is hard for me to talk about.
So we open the scene with Phoebe eating some ice cream, and she's like, "Oh man, this is ice cream before dinner. That's either something really great or something really bad." And we find out that it is the worst possible situation that any, what would it be? Would it be Royley? Let's say Royley. There's their couple name. Any Royley stands don't want to hear that they broke up. But Phoebe, being the observant, good girl that she is like, "You're both kind of stupid, huh?" Because every excuse they have for why they broke up makes no sense.
Yeah, they kept saying, we're just too busy. We're just too busy. And she's like, well, you were busy before. And Roy, the only thing Roy can think of is, well, we're more busy now. And they obviously didn't really want to break up. It obviously won't last very long. It was lovely to see it done, breaking it to Phoebe together, which shows that there's still like care between them. They wanted to do that, and they still wanted to show Keely cares about her. And yeah, it was done through a way of child just going, why? You get the answer, why? You get the answer, and it's why. And I think it just it was just a very nice scene. It was, despite being the worst news you can imagine, it was a really nicely done scene. And then there's a conversation with Roy and her in the back of the in his car, where Roy obviously still has no idea why they've broken up. I just thought it was well done.
Yeah, and that's the moment where he says that they're being stupid. She says, "Uncle Roy, can I say a bad word?" And he gives her permission. She's like, "I think you're both being stupid." It was a great scene, and again, the little girl that plays, the young girl that plays Phoebe is just phenomenal. She does great. Her role so well.
I love that she said, "Uncle Roy, can I say a bad word?" And considering the lines that she had in the previous two series, where every other word was like "fuck" or "shit," was just the word she says is stupid. I think it was just really good, because they had that whole thing where Roy had to teach her not to swear, and it's gone and taken that on board.
It's adorable, and it fits the character really well that that she would know that stupid is a bad word. You don't necessarily call someone stupid unless they are doing something stupid, but like, it's not necessarily an insult. Yeah. And I just, the way they played that off so well, and it just speaks to, I think Brett Goldstein at least co-wrote this script, and I don't know if you've watched Shrinking at all yet, but he's written most of those scripts, and he is just such a master with dialogue, and it just continues through Ted Lasso and Shrinking.
I haven't watched Shrinking. I will watch Shrinking, I promise. So after Keely and Roy break up, boo-hoo, we have a walk.
Royley officially dissolves.
Royley has liquidated. Boo-hoo. We get a Ted and Beard little chat where they're walking back to Ted's flat, and they're so engrossed in the conversation that Ted misses his front door. And I think that just shows that he doesn't really want to go back to his house alone. They're really hammering in this, like, Ted doesn't want to be alone thing really hard, which is great. I hope it doesn't last like that all season. It works for this episode, and it works for the reveal we're about to see. But you can only hit something so hard with a hammer before it becomes flat. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like the loneliness thing doesn't quite work when we know Sassy is there in the background, but like, we don't know what the agreed upon relationship status is for them, if it's just like regular hookups, booty calls, whatever. But I feel like Sassy is there for something other than just to occasionally be like, yeah, Ted still has sex, don't worry.
Well, it's very important that we know. Very important. With a mustache like that, the man has to be getting it. But then we move on to the very final scene, the very final conversation where Ted and Henry's back. Dad, I made it safely home. Lovely to speak to you again. And then he has a infinity gauntlet, and Ted goes, "Oh, that's cool. Where did you get it?" And he says, "Jake gave it to me." And Ted says, "Well, who's Jake?" And it says, "Mummy's friend." And that's where we kind of leave it. So Ted's ex-wife has obviously moved on, and Ted hasn't. Because the first thing we should have said, the very first thing we see in this episode is Henry's phone screen, and it says, "Have a safe flight. I love you." And you're meant to obviously think that that is for Ted.
Yeah, and that their relationship might be on an upswing, and then he hands it over to Henry, like, "Hey, your mom sent you a text."
And then fucking Jake comes and ruins everything, and just hate Jake so much.
Oh yeah, Jake is the worst.
The faceless man who had a second of mention is the worst. So that's episode 1. What did you think, Josh?
I really liked it as far as kind of reintroducing us to the Ted Lasso world. I do feel like that because of the extended production period with dealing with COVID and the pandemic delays, that it was kind of needed to refresh everyone, because there were certain points where I was like, what do I remember from season 2 and that has carried over, that will be carrying over? Like, I remember Ryan Keeley, I remember Nate leaving for West Ham and Rupert being the owner, but like, what else is there? And like, they got promoted, and I do like the idea that they're teasing bringing in new players, or they're going to try and bring in new players, which I'm wondering if maybe that could end up being a subplot of the season, that West Ham is going to kind of keep sniping players away, or at the very least dissuading them from signing with Richmond.
I love that happens in real life as well. So there's some famous stories of players, like, I'll give you an example. There was a guy called Willian who was going to sign for Tottenham Hotspur, to the point where Tottenham paid for his flight from Ukraine to London, only for Chelsea to contact his agent on the plane and say, "Well, we'll give you a bit more money." So Tottenham paid for his flight over, and Chelsea went and sniped the player. So that happens, and absolutely, I think could be a good plot, because they talk about getting some like fresh blood in to freshen up the team. And yeah, I agree. I think it was a good reintroduction. I think there were points in it that felt a bit wooden. I thought everyone was quite good. Wasn't mad on Henry, but like you said, we're not going to stick the boot in on him because he's a child actor. I do think that first time we see Leslie and Hannah Waddingham, Rebecca, rather than using her real name and confusing everything. The first time we see Leslie and Rebecca, it was a little bit like a high school play.
I can see that.
But, you know, we're getting back into the swing of it.
It really felt like they had a bit that they had to hit, and they were just reading the script.
But apart from that, I think mostly positive. I would say it's a solid 7.5 episode for the first one of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's fair. I was more excited about watching this than I was The Mandalorian this week. I still have actually not finished that episode. I fell asleep halfway through after I watched Ted Lasso.
Well, I think I said to you, did you think you'd talk about The Last of Us? The Last of Us finished on Monday, and this came out on the Wednesday, and I was so pleased to have something that wasn't quite as miserable as The Last of Us to watch.
Yes, Ted Lasso is an amazing palate cleanser.
And that's where we are. So I think we can say good episode, right?
Yes.
Are you doing Talking Smack must see, or are you or is that a given with Ted Lasso?
I think it's a given with Ted Lasso, but I think doing a little bit of a Game Club pod kind of rating could do some good for letting everyone know like how we feel about the episode, and then cool. Just like where it stands in the season, because like I still just do not understand the point of that Coach Beard episode in season 2. It just felt like they wanted a Coach Beard episode, and they wanted to do a little bit of like a psychedelic drug trippy episode, but they didn't want to have him on drugs. So they just did something extra weird.
I think we'll find one of them in this season as well. It tends to be like you get one of those kind of things a season. But I really hated that episode. I really hated that episode in season 2.
So weird. Like, I liked the bits where he was having like those weird mental breaks, and he's like, "Shut up, Thierry Henry." And
Legendary footballers Thierry Henry and Gary Lineker. Shut up.
Yeah, I like those moments, but overall that episode was so weird. But we are starting to run a little longer than we promised, so let's get
Yes.
into this game that you brought to the table here.
Okay, I have a very simple quiz for you, Josh. I've got 5 questions about football. Some of them you should know because you've seen Ted Lasso. Some of them you might not know, but I want you to give me an attempt at an answer even if you don't know it, okay?
All right, bring it on.
Okay, so first of all, what is 4-4-2?
So based on what the episode just described, it's basically a field positioning of the strikers, midfielders, and defenders. Would that be
Well done, yeah.
the proper term?
Yeah.
That's actually not even from Ted Lasso. So you have 4 strikers, 4 midfielders, and 2 defenders playing back.
Oh, you were so close. You got it backwards. So it's 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 strikers.
Okay, so that's what he's talking about with playing steady. Is you're dedicating more to defense and kind of doing the park the bus thing that they're talking about.
Yeah. Did they talk about park the bus in this as well?
No, I'm just drawing the analogy because that sounded like it sounds like Roy's kind of banking on that idea that we'll focus on staunch defense then because I didn't know what he was talking about. I like the punchline of like, oh, it sounds like something the Russians made up. It was.
Okay, cool. I'm going to give you the point. Even though we got the strikers, defenders the wrong way around, you're going to get the point there.
Cool.
If I said to you tiki-taka football, what would that mean?
Tiki-taka football. I have an idea of what it is, but I think that's going to be wrong. So I'm going to say it's going to be like kids level soccer, kids level football.
Unfortunately, that is wrong. Tiki-taka football is a style of football, possession-based, where you pass it around a lot. And the idea is the opponent can't score if they never have the ball. Don't ask me why it's called tiki-taka. It just is.
Okay. My next guess would have been a game where the officials take over and just make calls all over the place. Because in football, you say like they're playing ticky-tack because the officials are calling everything. Like, oh, they touched the quarterback's face mask. That's a 10-yard penalty and all that sort of stuff.
That sounds wild. It sounds chaotic. I like it.
Yeah, the referee crews are crazy over here.
Okay. How many players would a team have on the pitch at any one time if there was no sendings off?
In the field of play or like
in the field of
overall?
Play.
Isn't it 11 fielders and 1 goalie?
So close. 10 outfield players and 1 goalie.
Okay.
So 11 players overall. That's why when you say 4-4-2, you only count the outfield players because the goalie is always in the goal.
I could have done math and just figured that out.
When you're relegated from the Premier League, what is the division below called?
The Championship.
Well done. And finally, what club do Richmond use to film their stadium in real life?
Oh, you've told me this. I do not know. That does not stick in my brain.
Have a guess. Go on.
I'll say Nottingham. I don't know.
Unfortunately,
I don't even know if Nottingham is a real place.
Yeah, Nottingham's a real place. Nottingham Forest are in the Premier League. It's Crystal Palace.
Crystal Palace. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
And that's why they sent Jamie there. I think that was supposed to be like an homage to them letting them use their field in season 1.
Yeah. Well, in the season 1, the first game they ever show on TV is Richmond versus Crystal Palace.
That's right. That's right. Because who's the big one over there? Manchester United.
City. Well, Manchester United are, but Man City is where Jamie was loaned from.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, I was getting those 2 name drops confused.
By the end of the series, I'm going to have you as an expert on football.
All right.
I might come back and ask you some of the same questions later in the series and see if that knowledge has stuck with you.
My goal is to do better in this than Tim does in going for the get over here.
Okay, cool. Good shout. So the other thing we wanted to include was a real life football story, and these are going to be some of them mad, like our Maradona one that I mentioned earlier. Some of them not so mad, like the one I've got today. And the one I've got today is about a footballer called Omar Ebdelawi, who is a Norwegian footballer. He has travelled.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, exactly. He has travelled and played in many continents, but in January 2021, he moved to a club called Galatasaray in Turkey. And he didn't know any of his teammates. It's a great. There's some of the Turkish club names are brilliant, but Galatasaray is one of the big 2 or 3 clubs in Turkey. And he moved there. He didn't know anyone, and he moved in the January transfer window. So he spent his first New Year's away from all his friends and family from his old club. So it was him, his brother, his wife, and his 2 kids. And everyone was a bit depressed, and they said, okay, well, we're going to liven this up and we'll have some New Year's fireworks. And something went wrong, and Omar Abdullawi let off a firework that had too short a fuse, and it completely blinded him in both eyes. So totally blind. He had an ambulance called, and the ambulance driver took a photo of him knowing who he was and put it on social media. There were reporters and people waiting for him at the hospital to get photos for the press, and that's how his family found out that he'd had this accident, other than the ones that were there. Galatasaray coached him through it, but they basically said, you're never going to see again. And through a series of operations and experimentational operations, using his sister's donation of whatever they needed, on February 22nd last year, 13 months after it happened, Omar Abdullawi played again professional top flight football for Galatasaray. He'd lost some of the vision in his right eye, but he just kept going and kept telling himself that he's going to continue. And the photos and the stories, and when he talks about it, bring tears to my eyes. He's such an inspirational guy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. I urge you to look up interviews with Omar Abdullawi if you're interested. I promise next time I'll choose someone who's totally bonkers to bring the mood up rather than down.
Well, that just makes me think of, I don't know if you ever heard about Kirby Puckett, who played for the Minnesota Twins in baseball.
No.
He got pegged in the head on a fastball, and he just went blind instantly. And so he had retired right then and there in the middle of a game. And just makes me think like, oh man, if he had if that had happened now, like, would he have been able to get some experimental surgery, and could he have recovered a little bit of his eyesight?
Yeah, I just think it was an incredible story, and I thought it'd be a good one for the first episode.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's a very Ted Lasso-like story.
That's what I thought. With that, Josh, I've closed my notebook, so I think it's time to wrap this one up.
All right. So how do you want to do the socials? Because your main social is the Game Club pod. So I know how.
Forget my social. My social is the Talking Smack Discord.
There you go.
You can find me there.
All right. So yeah, please join the Talking Smack Discord. We have a Ted Lasso subgroup there where we can talk Ted Lasso season 3. If you're enjoying Ted Lasso, if you're enjoying this, or just the Talking Smack podcast in general, you can always find us on Talking Smack Pod at Twitter. And you can email us if you want to talk Ted Lasso specifically. Shoot us an email at Twitter at tsmackpod@gmail.com and just put in the subject line in all caps, Ted Lasso or Talking Lasso. If it's not all caps, I'm not going to look at it.
Well, with that, Josh, I hope you believe in belief. And I will see you next time for episode 2 of Ted Lasso.
Scram! Whistle! Whistle! 1,